Fish Flops is already wondering whether or not I would mind critiquing last week's piece that you put in feedback. Fish Flops, where did you put it? Did I just not see it? Can you just reply to your own post so I can see it? Fish Flops. Maybe your Discord username is different or something. I'm not sure. Okay, the first person. We've got some funny ones because we have some people that asked for feedback throughout the week that haven't received any. So I don't know if they are part of it. Maybe we'll leave them for now and come back if we have the time. The first one's DK, isn't it? Hello, DK. How are you doing?
Doing okay? Is it okay if I unmute, or should I mute myself back?
No. We'll have a chat about your thing. That'll be good. What we said, you want some feedback into composition and rendering light in graphical shapes and weird squiggly lines that look good.
Yeah.
You'd also like some feedback in presentation.
Yep.
I think the presentation is fine. Putting a frame around it is nice. It seems very sort of Lion Decker-y in a way. In terms of the rendering, I think everything's getting a little bit soft. And personally, if I wanted to make something more graphic, I would want a definite boundary between shadow and light. Now that can be like a core shadow, right, or form shadow, so it's still a soft shadow. But a soft shadow can be, could be something really soft and grade 80. But it could also be something like that, right? It's tight. And it's graphic. I could still make a very graphic shape with it, but it's soft. So let's take some of your limbs. Let's take this thigh and this leg. You've got a really hard cast shadow coming from the sword, which makes sense, but we're just not seeing it anywhere else. So I'm gonna split this thigh or this calf like that, and then probably something like that further up the leg as well. And I'm going to have one part that is definitely in shadow and the other part that's definitely in light. And then as soon as we get that contrast between light and shadow, we can play around with how much information you want to lose in the shadow, etc. You can play around with, well, how soft is the transition between light and shadow? Maybe you want it to be softer up here, but you want it to be quite tight down here on the top of the foot where that plane changes a bit more boxy, right? But I think what you're going to end up with, and we'd probably want to look a bit more carefully at some of these shapes that we're making, is something pretty graphic, and then you can get the idea that the shadow gets even darker at that core. So that's a little sort of poopy stinky example of it. This cast shadow is also going to be just as sharp as the shadow for the sword, I would imagine. If not sharper, because it's closer to the ground. So I like this, and I think as soon as you separate light and shadow a bit more boldly, you get all these interesting shapes that you can play with. And if you move these shapes or you change them, it's saying something else about the form that's going on. So maybe this should follow that leg as though it's being squished in, or maybe it should receive a bit more light reflected from the top of that calf or something. And then we could do that up here. So you have all these interesting forms where you've got like the serratus muscles under the chest. You're going to have a cast shadow coming down from the arm. You might have some kind of top-down light up here, but that's okay. And then I just think you can darken all of this and combine it because that's going to allow you to play with, well, with how graphic things are, isn't it? This whole thigh feels like it should be in shadow. I guess it is in shadow, but it's difficult to tell, is the whole point of what I'm saying.
My mind, there was also a little bit of a soft light that was maybe a little bit more distant coming over from the other side, lighting the front of her body.
Okay. It can be, but what I would think about is that there's some kind of like hierarchy of power between your different lights. So if this backlight is the strongest light, and then you have a soft light on the front, well, it might be soft enough to pick up some things, but it should never really be getting as strong as that backlight, right? So it's nowhere near the same value group. So we could go back in with a slightly lighter value, and you're right, we could lighten some of this stuff up a little bit. But it's still distinct from the background. The other thing that I think you could do to make things more graphic is just using more graphic shape. By that I mean like this hair that's coming behind the arm and framing it. It's the same value as a lot of the body at the moment, but can we just make it a big graphic dark shape to silhouette what's going on inside there a bit more nicely? Same thing up here on this arm, right? Under the chin, coming out from behind here. So it's sort of consolidating those shapes, and then now that it's one big solid shape, let's make a new layer. Now that it's one big solid shape, how kind of wacky and graphic could we be with it? I don't know. I'm not sanguine, unfortunately. He'd probably make some much wackier decisions, you know. But you could play around with all this stuff and just keep it simple and graphic and whatever else. I feel like that's probably not the vibe you're going for there. But yeah, I just solidify some of this stuff. You don't have to go quite as crazy and extreme as I've gone in trying to show the example here. Like, I can take this dark layer and I could just reduce the opacity a little bit, right? But we still have some kind of a separation between shadow and light, and these shapes are still getting more solid so that we can frame the body on top of them. Whereas without them, do you see how a lot of this in the mid-ground gets a bit confusing and mixed together because it's all that mid-grey?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. We'll do something like that. And then we can match the flowers in the same way. But you could do the opposite, and you could make the flowers like, are they emitting light or something? I don't know.
That would have been a cool idea.
But having that also go darker to contrast the thing that it's on. You're just playing with dark and light shapes on top of each other, and how well that looks.
I guess I should be less afraid to use contrasting values.
I think a way to go about playing around with this stuff, and I don't think what you've done is bad, and I don't think using contrasting values is always going to be the best thing, but it seems like if you are going for something more graphic, then it is the solution in this case. So generally I think there are two ways to start a painting, and maybe there are more and I'm being an idiot, but I think you have your value scale that goes from black to white, and I think either you can start in the middle and then slowly go darker and slowly go lighter, which seems like what you've done here, right? You've started on that mid-tone background, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're using little hatching and pencil work to go darker and go lighter and build the value out of the figure. I think that's good, and I think it makes things feel quite 3D, and it's a really good way to think about form. Let me grab some paintings that I think I've done the same thing for. So this is a painting that I built out of mid-tone, and it's a bit slower, but I think you have the sort of space and the time to just build up that form step by step and make things feel quite nice in 3D. But that is the downside, is it's slower, and I don't think it's anywhere near as graphic because it doesn't rely on the graphic bit is sort of an afterthought where you have to build up to something graphic. Whereas you could work. I've got to dig through my paintings to find an example of something a bit more graphic. Like this. You could work from the extremes, right? So instead of working in the middle outwards, you start at the extremes. You start with black and white shapes, and then you sort of sneak inwards to that middle tone. So you could start with just saying, look, I'm building the figure out of these shadow and light shapes, and then I'm going to put back on some of this form and tone after you've decided what the shapes are going to be. And you get something graphic because it has to be graphic to work. There's no way of avoiding it being graphic. But then you can build back into the middle, and I still think it retains a lot of these graphic shapes after the fact, like the shadows in places and things. So if you're struggling to get something really, really graphic, and that's something that you want, I would do a series of paintings or drawings where you start with like just an 100% opacity brush, and you start saying, well, actually, what are the shapes that I want, and you can pretty quickly start building something up. Like this is a face, obviously. I think faces are super recognizable, aren't they? You know, and then I could, just by defining the background, I could make this guy really muscly or like really chubby or whatever else, right? Through use of graphic shape. And you can play around with that. Have you ever used Alchemy, the program?
No.
I'd go and check out Alchemy. It's a really old program now. I hope it's still up. They should have a website or something. But it was an old program where the whole point of it was that you were limited to using like a lasso tool and all these weird brushes and things that didn't behave like you'd expect them to, and they just produce wacky graphic shapes, and you have to use that to build up an image and see how far you can get with that. But practice both. There are loads of people. Dan Milligan's another really good example. Go and check out Dan Milligan's work. I'll post a link to it later. But he's a storyboard artist, and he almost exclusively works like this. And you see how much he gets away with, and how he can just indicate a face with a couple of little shapes. But then at the same time, keep doing what you're doing. Do both of them. It's not like you have to pick one or the other. I think they're both just two different skills that are really going to help you as a painter. And they sort of complement each other quite nicely, because you can take something really graphic. Let's see, and then you can begin to work into it with mid-tone and whatever else, and build up something really, really cool. You know, and I could now go back into this with a smudge, and I could soften out some of those form shadows and leave the cast shadows a bit harder, or whatever else. Maybe I soften the edge of the face, and then maybe we go darker again inside of here. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. I'm not just rambling.
It does. Thank you.
But yeah, it's a very nice drawing. You should be
Thank you.
happy with it. Who's next? Who's next? Faye is next. Let's put all of this in a folder. Boink. You have a reference for this as well, don't you? I've seen this pirate woman.
Yeah, it's one of my DMD characters.
No, I mean the reference.
Oh, the reference. Oh, okay.
I've seen the. I mean, yeah, I've also seen the D&D character. It's the same character that you've asked for feedback on before, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
I posted a slightly altered version of the drawing because I kept working on it even after posting it for feedback.
Okay, I'll grab it.
There's not a lot that's different. It's just.
That's okay. We'll work with the most up-to-date version. What specifically are you looking for feedback on?
I mean, honestly, the forums. So, not in a because I know anatomy. More like very eye-catching shapes, because that's one thing I'm having a slightly harder time figuring out, because I saw a YouTube video a week ago that was talking about less trying to get detail in shapes and trying to just get the vibe of the shape more. So I've been trying to get that.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and forgive me if you've already heard it, because you've heard me speak quite a bit, but for the benefit of other people who are listening, I think I even spoke about it in another critique video. It's this idea that you can split up drawing into like shape and form, and the shapes inform the forms. And I mean, it's just like we were talking about here, right? Where actually, if you can get a very specific shape, it says something about the form very, very simply. That's quite strong. And the thing that I am most thinking about with yours is just some of these anatomical forms seem a little bit off. So this shoulder feels like it's dislocated at the moment. If we just look at our reference, and if we do that pose ourselves, you'll see that both of the shoulders go up as you do it. I mean, I'm doing it now, you can't see. Maybe I should invest in a webcam. But both of the shoulders are going up, and then the forearms are coming backwards, almost sort of tucking in to either side of the rib cage. Not the forearm, the upper arm, and then the forearm comes back out from that. And one other thing is that the shoulders are in line. The head is on a slight angle, but the shoulders are in line with like everything else that's going on here. Whereas you have some of these landmark features on the rib cage that are going this way, and then this shoulder's like really far down. It's not really far down and in. It might make sense if this shoulder was like in, like back here, and then it comes out. Right. But I would just you have your reference here. I wouldn't, for now, I would stick to what the reference is telling you and then make adjustments from there. So I'd move this arm up, and so it's in line with this shoulder, and then like the tilt of the head. So you're getting this quite nice gesture here where the whole body is tilting up and to the right, but your whole body's going up, and then the head is like tilting back the opposite way, which it can. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think in terms of, and I have no clue how close you wanted to get to this, but in terms of looking at a reference and trying to bring that back into your own work, you know, the overall gesture of the thing is something that's going to be quite important. So have a think about that. But yeah, these arms, they're going behind, they're going backwards, whereas this is coming in front of what's going on here. Just look at how we're basically just seeing a little forearm poke out. Now, on a big scale, we're thinking about like how closely the shoulders are in line with each other. But on a littler scale, we might be thinking about the features of the face and whether or not they're in line with each other. So we have a chin, and then we have a mouth, and then your nose is like slightly to the right, and then we've got our eyes, but this one's coming up at an angle, whereas this one's following the sort of parallel lines of the face. And then this is coming up on one side, but not coming back down on the other side. So just thinking about aligning those forms. Look at the chin compared with the shoulder line. Your chin is like 5 miles above the shoulders. So again, these shoulders are coming up. Another way of showing that off is going to be to have the head move down, or the shoulders up. But I think your head is too far away from your shoulders currently. Now, that's most of the anatomy-y stuff covered. What else was it that you wanted feedback on with this? You said like clarification of individual forms with shape.
Stuff like that. It was like, I feel like I do make the mistake of trying to go way too detailed with stuff and trying to get it look like more realistic. Whereas I feel like I should try to just get basic shapes and then
I could see that.
it look better.
I think honestly I'd prescribe something similar to this, where you are just playing around with, if you want to get better at making simple shapes, then force yourself to make simple shapes. And practice that and see how far you can get. I'm sure with just 2 values you could get something that has gesture, looks 3D, has all the forms in the right places that you'd want them to be, feels like it's lit from a specific direction, and you could do all that with just 2 values without worrying about a lot of this other stuff. So that's probably what I'd recommend. Is think about things in terms of those graphic shapes. Do look at, in fact, just because I've said it twice now, I'm gonna go and grab some Dan Milligan examples on ArtStation. So let's see. So here's a Dan Milligan, and again he's doing tons of these because it's part of a storyboard. But the whole area underneath the chin, the whole collar area, is that graphic shape, and that graphic shape is in perspective, right? It says something about the space between his coat and his chest, and then it comes back out here, which is telling us where his legs are. Just that shape for the shoulder and the arm interacting with, the chest and everything else is really quite cool. And then thinking about using shapes in the background to tell that form as well. Let me see if he's got another one, because he does this with characters too. In fact, let me find his character design work. It was what's it called? Love, Death and Robots. He's done a lot of work on. So here are his character design sketches for Love, Death and Robots, and he's designing characters in the same way. Like, these are just graphic shapes. He's very much a sort of, it's like one of those old comic artists. And those graphic shapes say something really important about the form. And if he wanted to, he could take this further. He could build on those shapes, but the shapes are the foundation of the thing that he's making, rather than the other way around. Again, I'll just reiterate that this is one way of thinking and working, and I think it's a way that people should give some time to. I I find that a lot of the time people are trying to find that sort of one method of working, and I think you should try every method of working. You should try this and then try and paint like someone else, and see how that works, and then try and paint by describing really subtle forms instead of using the graphic shapes, and see which one you lean towards, and see how much of that information you can sort of bring together. But yeah, that would be my advice. So there's some anatomical stuff that is a little bit funky. The background is something that you might also want to think about. So just remember those perspective lessons. You're saying that this is your horizon line, but I think I'm looking down on the chest. I'm definitely looking down on this waist. I'm looking down here. See the top of the arm. If this was your horizon line, then everything above it would be going the opposite way. We'd see more of the underside of the chin. I'd see the underside of these arms, etc., etc. Your horizon line is probably actually up there. If I had to guess, might be higher. But that is important. I think people take visual cues from things like the background. I think that has a big effect on how an audience is perceiving the thing that you're telling them to look at. Like, it might not seem like a lot, but actually these lines on the cupboard are indicating that our horizon's there. Maybe it's lower. No, it looks like it's there to me. And that's important when we're understanding this thing in 3D space. It's something that everyone recognizes and everyone understands without understanding it. Every single audience member will look at it and know that something's off or wrong, right? There you go.
Thank you.
I should, I'm going to put these in feedback. I was forgetting to put them in feedback, wasn't I? So, first one's DK. There we go. And then the second one is Faye. Okay. Let's check chat. People are using alchemy. Someone says the critiques are good. Thank you very much. I should do clips of these. I need to pay someone to just go through my streams and chop them up into little like YouTube Shorts clips. Or maybe just split up clips and upload them as videos on the channel or something, because I do enjoy them, and I'm just very, very lazy. Right, next is Victor.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
You want to know how to draw feet and shoes?
Yeah, in general, I just have a problem with that whole part of the body. I don't really understand how legs and feet and shoes and all of that works.
Should we give you a crash course in legs and feet and shoes?
Yeah, I have a problem where I can understand it if I'm, like, line of action, if you know that site, if I'm working with that.
Yeah.
And if I pull up an actual reference in the middle of an actual drawing, I just can't work with it.
You can't apply it. Well, you at the moment you're going for something that's reasonably stylized. So if you tried to draw from reference a human leg here, it might not work so well. I like these legs. I think these legs work well within the style of what you set out to do. They have a nice flow to them. Like, it feels like underneath all of this there is a thigh and a calf.
Oh, yeah, I sketched that out first and then I added the clothing.
Yeah, those are nice. So I have no problem with the legs at all here.
I think the feet are tiny, actually.
I think the feet are really tiny, but the scale of the feet is something that you can get away with depending on, again, how stylized the character is. What they're kind of like a fox cat person. Wolf, a fairy, some kind of fairy. So I'm imagining that inside of here are almost like, I don't know much about fairies, but I'm imagining that these are paws or something. So I think you get away with feet being smaller, imagining that they are from like an animal that has paws and not human feet.
It is a genuine mistake.
I think the problem that I have is a perspective one, where like this shoe we are viewing from the top down. Okay, so if we plotted a dot where the heel is, it would probably be there, and then the toe of the foot is further down, which puts our horizon line like here, which is where it should be. So this shoe is fine, but then this shoe has this perfect straight line that says that our eye level is in line with the bottom of that shoe, like we are crawling on the floor like a bug. And so all I would do is take these dimensions over here and do something similar. Say that's the heel and that's the front of the shoe.
The shoes are just extremely weird to me from that angle.
Yeah, they are a bit funny, right? But that, and maybe people can disagree, that to me feels more, it's a bit big compared with this other one, feels
Yeah,
to
well,
me
the other one's just
more
tiny.
as though it's in perspective, and it continues the gesture of the leg, because otherwise you get this swoopy gesture in the leg and you've got this cloth, and this is a nice S-curve, and then it goes bam and it sort of hits a brick wall there and stops. Whereas that continues it, and it works with the perspective of the rest of the body. So I think everything has to be understood within the bounds of perspective. I think we'll make
Okay.
it a little bit bigger. I don't mind this shoe. So the way that you're going to stylize it's going to be very different to me. There's nothing, say, wrong with this other than the perspective. I think maybe you could, there's more information that you could get in, like where the front of the shoe, at the back of the shoe end, or if there's like a cuff at the top. You know, you seem to have a reasonable amount of information there. But I think that's fine. The way that I would approach feet and shoes in general, I think I took from an Ahmed Eldori video 5 or 6 years ago or something, and I've not stopped using it since. Is this idea that when you know, if you imagine a crime scene, you have the kind of footprint shapes, right? And you can, if you can draw those footprints in perspective, and you don't even have to separate the heel and the bottom, so I would sort of draw it like that. That to me is a footprint in perspective.
Yeah, it reads as that.
Yeah, it's just it's this weird blobby footprinty shape that I think people recognize. Then you can build the rest of something else on top.
That is incredible, wow.
Right. There you go. There's a foot. There's something coming out of that. And I do the same when I do my gestures, so I'll go, here's a gesture. And I'll literally, the line that I will draw to indicate the foot will just be the inside edge of that footprint shape, which will be something like that. And then if I want to turn that into an actual foot, I can sort of build on top of it, right? But it's the inside edge. That other foot's a bit harder. Other people tend to break up the foot into a couple of sections. They tend to have some kind of box for the heel, and then you get some kind of hollowed out tube for the main part of the foot, and then I would separate the big toe, and then I would have all those other toes be another box, right? And then if you're seeing the other side of the foot, the inside, so our big toe is over here, then our little toes are over there. Then the important thing to note is that curve on the inside of a foot, isn't it? curves in a lot more. But the way I'm approaching all this is very perspective centric, sort of constructing things as strong 3D forms, and that's the way I've learned to understand it, and that's the way I would recommend if you want to draw a lot of things from your imagination, that you begin to understand it. So it's all good and well me saying do this, but if you're not comfortable, constructing some of those
tried to
forms.
learn like that as well.
Yeah.
It is applied in like 2D styles like that in my experience as well.
Yeah, I think that's the best way I can think to construct a foot. But the shorthand for it is definitely this sort of like...
Yeah, I really like that method. It seems really like I instantly get that that's a foot.
the footprint shape, and then you're just extruding form out of that. And even if you wanted to extrude, something really silly and blocky out of it, like it still feels kind of like a foot, right?
Yes.
And so that it's like a floor plan of what a foot should look like. Does all that make sense? Do you want any other critique on anything? I've sort of done that quite quick, haven't I?
Well, in general, I just have problems with clothing folds, but you said that I've got the pants down well, which is not generally what I thought before, so I'm glad. I'm really glad.
I think they look fine. Yeah, most of the complex stuff with the pants goes on here, and you've got that covered by a shirt. You get these area where the two are sort of together, and you get all that tension going on. And then you get whatever else is going on with the belt. But yeah, you got that covered. I think this is quite nice and graphic where all these lines are coming out of a place. Obviously what you've done is simplified, but that it should be. I think that's fine. One thing I would watch out for, I love this arm, by the way. I love this arm and hand.
Thank you so much.
This is a tangent. A pretty nasty tangent. Do you know what a tangent is? Yeah. Because it's sort of colliding with the edge of the ear, and then this little tip on the flame goes all the way up to the other edge of the ear, and it feels like it's sort of trapped within this shape. I think what you could do instead is just have it overlap a little bit, and then it feels like it's going in front of the ear instead of interacting with it in a funny way. Yeah.
It feels like there's less of a tangent if you really zoom in, which is what I depend on a lot, but you zoomed out, and that really reads as a tangent.
Yeah, I think we're sort of opposites in that sense. I don't zoom in all that often. I tend to do most paintings just sort of zoomed out, like I'm viewing a sketchbook or something, So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Who's next? Ryan. You're next. With this, which is very nice. Hello. You there, Ryan? Are you comfortable speaking on stream? It's okay if not.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even realise I was muted on Discord.
No, that's okay.
I'm okay, yeah.
This is for a competition of some kind?
Yeah, it's for Unreal Bjornament, if you've heard of it.
Unreal Bjornament? No, I haven't. It's some kind of Unreal tournament challenge thing.
No, it's just a kind of like knockout tournament between 100 artists.
Oh, it's a bit like Chroma Core.
Does Chroma Core have like eliminations?
I think so, yeah. Like the Hunger Games, but for art.
Yeah. It's like Battle Royale, but art.
Okay. That's cool. And you're wondering if the composition and story elements work. The prompt was he/she hadn't seen anything like it in his or her 20 years of space travel.
And I'm just kind of because it obviously what you as someone who makes it perceives and what someone who is just looking at it as an observer sees can be different things. So
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of see if I've hit the brief from kind of like an outside perspective.
I think you need to push the emotion in it more. It feels like to me that it's fairly nice in how it's rendered and things, right? You got your buildings, you got your sky. I like how these elements are stacked on top of each other. I think you've gone a little bit crazy with the atmospheric perspective. Like this feels. I'll tell you how you know it's crazy, Ryan. Is atmospheric perspective. It affects light more than it affects shadow more than it affects light. Does that make sense? So
Kind of.
if you're viewing a mountain, okay. How am I gonna? Here's our mountain, right? And then we're gonna have. I'll do it in a separate layer. There's our mountain shape. Right, and then on this mountain, we have snow. Something like that. Right, and then on the snow, we have the shadow. Now, if we were right next to it, the shadow might just look like the shadow of snow. But it's going to pick up a lot of the colour of the sky, right? So you get that nice blue shadow on a lot of this that we're all familiar with. That blue atmospheric perspective. Well, that's fine. But what you're doing here is you're going, well, there's atmospheric perspective. And that means that everything gets more blue. And everything gets more faded rather than just the shadows. And that doesn't tend to happen. We tend to still see that pure white snow on a mountain because it's being hit by light, which is being reflected into our eyes, right?
Right.
So when you're approaching these buildings, it might be, yes, the shadows are getting darker, right? But your sun is coming from your left side. I can see that here. Like, these roof tiles should not be getting sort of grayed out and blue. They should be just as bright and colourful and glorious as they should be. Right. Like, this part of the tower is being hit by the sun. It seems to be some kind of, like, grey stone. Like, that should be just as light. And then it's the shadow part that gets lighter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think kind of like where I've went off, or like kind of where my thought process went wrong was, obviously the most intense lighting is on the girl in the space pod, which is intentional. That's my focal point for the image. But in doing that, it seems like I've forgotten about just a core rule with lighting.
It's not as egregious as you. I don't want you to get the idea. I'm framing it as if it's some kind of cardinal sin. It's not that big of a deal, but it is throwing off some of the depth here. The other thing that there are lots of different kinds of atmosphere and therefore atmospheric perspective, and it feels like, oh, maybe it's quite a dusty road here. That a lot of this stuff, like this night, the reason he's getting a bit brighter is because there's dust that's been kicked up on the road, assumedly when this spaceship's fallen from space. But I think you want to be able to differentiate between what is sandy and dusty, and then, this isn't that far away, so maybe this should get a little bit darker again. Maybe these shadows shouldn't be quite that blown out. That building in the background, for sure. This building, maybe we should see some darker shadows in here. Ooh, not that dark. But yeah, it's just playing around with the level of atmospheric perspective that you've pushed, because it makes it feel like this foreground character sort of exists on a separate plane to the rest of the image, and they're not part of everything else that's going on. So yeah, this is a little bit too faded. Now narratively, which is the thing that you, I think, want the most feedback on. I think you can just push it more, because push the emotion of the characters, and people, you don't have to see their faces. Like, people can emote with their bodies and their gesture and the pose that they're in. Now the prompt is what, in all of her time she'd never seen something like this before, something like that. She looks like she doesn't care. She's like touching her spaceship, going, "Oh, is the spaceship okay?" She's not even noticed that there's like a medieval town behind her, right? So, the idea of the prompt to me is the idea of amazement and marvel, and she's, wow, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And she stood pretty normally, like fixing a panel on a spaceship. So, she's not as the focus of the image. She's not telling the story that you want to tell her. And then, like, this knight dude, he's also not interacting with this character at all. They're facing away from each other. They couldn't be interacting less with each other. He's, like, just off doing his daily business. She's doing her business. They don't care. Could it be that actually this knight's, like, got his arm up, right? And they've got some more men down here that are just absolutely amazed at what's just fallen out of the sky. They can't believe it. All the townsfolk have gathered round on the stairs, like, watching. And then actually this character is like touching the spaceship to make sure it's okay. And she could even have, like, I don't know how violent she is. She could have a gun out and be like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Maybe she's dropped her gun or her
I think she definitely has something, because she's very much at risk of being burned at the stake for being a witch.
Yeah, something like that, right? So it depends on the story that you're trying to tell. But I'd lean into this idea that, oh my god, she's amazed. What's going on? Or, is she gonna throw her hands up? I come in peace. Don't shoot. Have they got, like, bows and arrows aimed at her? But you're getting some kind of an interesting interpersonal interaction between two people from different time periods. That's so interesting. That's so cool. And there's so much you can think about there, and how you're going to express that relationship between those two people. So it seems like a shame or a waste to have them, like, turning away from each other and ignoring each other, right? So you're really getting there with the technical execution. Looks really nice. Is this it seems like it's mostly photobashed. I don't know how much Blender you've used, but this little pod thing, that is such a cool design for a pod. It's almost like a flower that's about to open or something.
It is 90% Blender, and please, like, I don't want to take credit. Like, there's a bunch of kit bashing going on in here,
Yeah,
I didn't have much time.
That's fair. That's completely fair. But the technical execution's really getting there. So it's working on what kind of a story do you want to tell? Let me open up some images. I can't remember if you've seen them. I do these spit paints now and then.
I may have seen them, but it's worth having another look.
Yeah, they're little half an hour things, and I think they're really good practice for, like, telling some kind of a story. Because in half an hour, you've got the opposite problem where you don't really have the ability to push the technical aspect all that much. So you just want to make an image with some kind of a compelling story. So this one's pretty boring. But it's still someone interacting with something. I think I'm not getting enough emotion on his face and his expression. What was he thinking as he's smiting down these spiders? Is he injured? Is he hurt? Is there someone else that's, like, stuck in a web somewhere? I don't know. I like this one that this fella's just out with his dog, and some giant being rises out of a lake, and he's like, "Oh God, now I've got to fight it," and the dog's sort of carrying behind him because it's scared. But it's such a little thing, and again, I think I could push this so much more. It's like a spider that's come out of a den, and people are running away from it. They're simple, but they get some kind of a story, no matter how simple that story is. And the story here is giant creature we weren't expecting. Everyone's running away. You can imagine the chaos or whatever. Now imagine if I had like a spider in here, but the people were just sort of stood around doing nothing.
Yeah. Because the main point is like,
Yeah.
if there's something in the scene, make sure there's an interaction.
It is exactly that. It's just that interaction. Like I couldn't have this giant being here, and this guy's like stood. He's just stood around, and his dog sat next to him. Like they're looking at each other. They're interacting with each other. This says something about what's about to happen. So maybe more of those little practice. They don't have to be paintings. They could be little doodles, drawings. Don't worry about the technical quality of them. Worry about the story that you're trying to tell. And then you build the technical execution around that, right? Because you're a storyteller, essentially. That's what you're aiming for. What's the story here? Could it be you've got these? I don't know if this is just a random HDRI you found. But this thing's just crashed. Could it be that it's smoking and actually, there's some kind of trail in space that says that's where this character's just come from. Or there are more pods landing or something. I don't know. That'd be something interesting to play around with. So yeah, story. All about story. Story, and just watch out that you're not crushing everything with... Did you use like a principled volume cube and just shove it on top of all these buildings?
Yeah. I did try and use stuff like missed passes, and obviously I was in Photoshop trying to clean it up, but I think I've got a tendency to be a bit too heavy-handed when it comes to like atmosphere.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's just something to watch out for going forward. That's okay. Right. Good. Nice image.
Okay.
Who's next? Eduardo is next. Let me mute and take a bite out of my sandwich before we continue. Right. You're gonna have to hop on, Mike, and explain to me what some of these images are. There's like a dog carrying away a child.
So I actually I uploaded the head drawings again at a higher resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on the channel, right?
Yeah. Let me grab them. I just screenshot them anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about the resolution.
Okay.
I can see what you're doing. I can see what's going on. Okay. Do you want to talk about the heads, or do you want to talk about the dog carrying a child?
Do we have time for both?
Yeah, we might do. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Okay, so I'll ask you about the dog, I guess.
Okay.
Like, I won't necessarily correct the dog because I got to do the heads and hens assignment thing, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the dog, it was basically fairly open-ended assignment. It was draw like an anthropomorphic character along with a human character. Okay. And have at least like a ground plane and some kind of side plane going on.
Okay.
Actually, I could upload that. I made some studies of that, like Greyhound breed and stuff, to kind of understand what it looked like. And the idea was basically to have it be, kind of humorous, like this really tall, skinny, weird-looking guy with a short.
It is pretty funny. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
And I tried to make the girl look as as round, like slightly plump, big breasts, big thighs, to make it contrast a
Okay.
lot, which
Um,
is kind of what makes it funny, I guess.
I feel like that's fair. If I were to draw this out,
Hmm.
I think compositionally I'd do two things differently. So, imagine that this is a dog.
Hmm.
I would really push the perspective so it feels like the dog is walking forward. There's a lot of motion in the girl, like she's being pulled or something.
Hmm.
But the dog sort of feels like he's just stood there. You've also got this Dutch tilt in the background, and that sort of says that there's some kind of motion or action going on, and so getting that to read a little bit more, and then could it be that the girl is like latched onto the dog's arm, and at the moment you're hiding a lot of the girl behind the dog,
That's
but
true.
could it be that the
So
girl
the idea for the
girl's sort of
I guess
struggling
the
to keep up?
story. So that wasn't it actually. So the idea was it's kind of like a couple, and so the dog is like very serious and has this trench coat and everything, and the girl is like bubbly and she's looking, oh, look at the building, and like this is so fun and whatever.
Okay.
So that was it.
I think maybe the composition you want is not one that's so dynamic. This really
Okay.
dynamic composition makes it feel like they're like rushing through the street. Her pose as well makes it feel like she's being like whisked away or dragged or something.
Because the leg is supposed to be in the air, or like the bat leg, the one that's
Oh, this
jutting
is
out backwards.
and this is her other leg. I think that's the other thing that maybe isn't reading so well is
Mm-hmm.
all three of these legs are on the same plane on the x-axis, but she's behind the dog. So if her foot is here, but her torso is further back in Z depth, right? So we can imagine that her torso's up here. Then she's gonna fall backwards, which is what I think is making her look so unbalanced. Like, should her foot actually be like back here behind the dog? In perspective, but essentially, if you're trying to show off the some kind of relationship or dynamic between these two characters, and one is bubbly and one is not, the bubbly person should probably be taking up a lot more of the attention in the space because that's their personality, and the dog, because the dog is like twice the size of her. It's in front. We can't see her. He's also got the more boring pose because you want him to have a more boring pose, right?
Right.
Let's do another little. So could
I
it
also
be
have a
that
question when it comes to the background, actually.
Yeah.
I actually had like an hour and a half to like give it out because it was an assignment, right? So the original idea was just didn't have much of a story, I guess. Like it was just like I do like a Persian rug, and one of those like New York walk, don't walk signs. But then I couldn't do that, and then I kind of settled on a like movie studio or a movie studio like cute little town. And that's, I mean, I'm kind of annoyed I didn't get to do what I originally wanted, but like I don't know if that like it's funny and it's cute, but I don't know if that jives with the characters.
I know what you mean. It feels at the moment like the background is a little bit
Like
arbitrary.
generic background number one, right?
Yeah, and it's probably just because there's not enough information here. Like, okay, now it's generic background number one because these are very simple, primitive shapes for buildings. It feels almost like a block out or something. But if you started getting more information on and you actually described what kind of roof tiles these are, and there's like maybe it's like a menu sign, maybe it's like a Japanese town, and is there
Yeah.
a table where there's like a guy selling food, and that's what it is that she's pointing at, then it's going to feel a lot more lived in, you know, and then you're going to get like clutter. Is the curb going to be what, like they're crossing a road, but it's a very thin road
Yeah.
that a car's actually going to drive around it. Maybe they're not crossing a road, maybe it's just like a cobbled street, you know, and there are more people in the background, so it's the other thing that's making it feel a bit weird is that it's completely deserted and they're the only ones there. Like that's what makes it feel almost like a study and less like a scene that
Yeah.
people are in, right?
I should give a thought to like what's like why are they there, right?
Why, yeah, and just come up with like a little fun story in your head. The idea that you're contrasting like this nervous tall greyhound with this bubbly little woman it's almost Ghibli-esque, and I can imagine it playing out really nicely.
Yeah.
But you need to think about the world that they're inhabiting and why they're there. Are they on holiday together? Have they just met each other and she's like dragging him through the streets? But think about that composition again. So it's really dynamic at the moment. Maybe you don't want it to be. Maybe you want it to be a lot flatter. And here's one character. She's pointing at a food vendor. And the greyhound's sort of... I can't draw a greyhound. But, you know, the greyhound's kind of stood there looking a bit awkward. Maybe she's looking at one shop that sells human food and he's looking at, like, a pet store with, like, some big bones or something, right? And so their attention's split and you get to see them stand by side and you get to see how awkward he is and how... You know, is she really, really excitable? Or, you know, she's like...
Yeah, like cheerleader, right?
She's got a hand on her head, like she can't believe what they're selling, and he's just sort of like, bones. But these are ideas that you can play around with, and you can play around with them like this in little sketches before you commit to, you know, it feels like you've put a reasonable amount of time and effort into doing this quite clean line work and stuff, to then realize that you don't know what the story is. Whereas you can invest like 5 minutes of your time into a really little quick sketch and go, what is the image I'm trying to make? What's the story I'm trying to tell?
Cool.
I'm just gonna post this in the chat and then we'll have a look at the heads.
Cool.
What are you trying to do with the heads?
That's just
You're separating shapes
draw 5 heads.
into
Okay.
light and shadow. Was that it? Just draw 5 heads?
Yes, like draw 5 heads and 10 sets of hands or 10 hands.
Okay.
So
I think these are fine. I think you're drawing the heads. They seem anatomically correct to me.
okay.
You know, you're separating light and shadow, which is a good thing to be aware of, is breaking things down into where light is and where shadow is. Some lines, if we really wanted to be nitpicky, like this shadow should be going up, you know, onto that cheek. This mouth is probably a little bit too big and a little
I
bit
noticed that,
too low down, like it should be further up.
I mean,
but
these studies are not supposed to go on.
I was just gonna say, I'm being fairly nitpicky.
Well, that's good, but like these studies, they're not supposed to take like. Okay, I agree with what you're saying. It's a different thing, right? They're not supposed to take too long, but at the same time, I was wondering if I should, like, because this doesn't have a finished aspect to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if I could do it like it's not. I shouldn't take the whole day. Like just do it in a way that's more appealing, as in looks like a finished work somehow.
I think.
But it's still a quick study, you know.
Yeah, I think there are 2 different routes that you can go down, and it's kind of risky. So the first is you go, oh, it looks good.
Yeah.
Great. And you put a little bit more time in and it looks good, and what that does is it convinces you to make more. So the benefit of you making studies that actually look visually appealing as well as being useful for your learning is that it's going to convince you to study more, which is really helpful. The downside is you're gonna begin to concentrate more on how good it looks, and so
Then learning.
you might learn less.
That's not what I want, right?
And
I'm
exactly,
explaining it,
and
right?
it might get to the point where you're so used to making things that look good that when it doesn't look good, you throw it away, or you get annoyed that it doesn't look good when actually you're still learning something valuable from it. So I just watch out for that. I think it's perfectly fine if you want to make something a bit more enjoyable for yourself so that you could do it more. But these heads are okay. I don't think you need to. They do kind of look good. Like that. That's a nice continuous line drawing. It feels complete to me in its own sense.
thank
So
you.
does this. It's a different level of complete. It's complete when you've learned something from it. You could take these and paint over them if you want, but you'd be learning something else. You wouldn't be as an extension of the exercise. You wouldn't be learning the thing you originally set out to do, right?
Okay.
So just go ahead, make it look good, and paint it more if that's something you want to do. But I want you to be really aware that what you're doing is making it look good and not
Not learning.
something. Well, you might be learning something. You might be learning how to polish it. It depends how you want to make it look good.
Okay.
But it's almost a distraction from whatever goal that you have in mind. A lot of my studies are. Should we open up some studies? Let me see if I can find one. Like that's a study I think I did as a demonstration for a student,
That's cool.
and it's like super low resolution, really awful shapes that are out of line. And I was trying to demonstrate how negative space, that's a shape, but it can cut out, and I can demonstrate that principle without it being polished. If I wanted, I don't think this looks very good. I could take it and I could spend another half an hour on it painting it up, but I'm not learning anything else. I'm just painting it up.
Yeah,
So,
like what's the point? Like I have other things to do. To
yeah,
paint.
it's one of the reasons I recommend that students stay away from social media, is because that's one of the biggest traps that you can fall into, right? Is if everything has to eventually go on Instagram or Kara or whatever the new social media is,
I see.
then you're going to become more and more paranoid about how good it looks, and then you're not going to learn. You should have a little sketchbook where you just draw and draw and draw, and you don't show anyone. You look at a way it's just for you, and you don't worry about failing and making horrible mistakes and things that look really bad, because that's the thing that gets in the way of progress and learning, I think.
I see. Joe, there's okay. I want to go to an art event. Like I'm considering traveling to go.
Okay.
I only know right, like the Trojan horse was a unicorn and Lightbox.
Mhm.
Which events do you know? What are they like? What's the difference between one and the other? What they focus on?
I didn't even know that Trojan Horse was a unicorn had an event, but if they do, that sounds cool. I really like Trojan Horse as a unicorn. I like their Sketchbook Tour series. They've got their own platform now.
Okay.
So by all means, I've been to 3 art events, and I can give you my honest review of them. And we'll see if I can be kind, because I don't want to get in trouble with anyone. So I've been to Vertex,
Okay.
which I think is a UK exclusive. I've been to Playgrounds.
What does that mean?
So I think Vertex is only an event that happens in the UK. I don't think it happens anywhere else. And I've been to Concept 101, which I think is also a UK exclusive event. So these 2 are kind of out for you. But I'll go through them.
Why?
Well,
Why?
I mean, you could come to the UK if you wanted, but you're going to be spending a lot of money on plane tickets and whatever else, aren't you?
I'm going to be spending a lot of money if I go to. Trojan Horse is going to be in Portugal.
Okay.
Lightbox is in the US, and I'm in Brazil.
Either way, you're buggered.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, decide what you want to spend your money on. Now Vertex I don't recommend. For Vertex, as a 2D visual artist, does concepts and things, Vertex seems a lot more sort of techy now. It used to be back in 2021 when I went that it was very much for 2D artists. Carl Kopinski was going to be there. Carla Ortiz was there. Evan Amundsen was there. Loish was there. And it was really, really good when I went in 2021. But I went again this year, and I didn't know anyone that was there. It was very, very sort of tech based. It felt like it was more for programmers than 2D artists. So Vertex is off my list. I don't like Vertex anymore. Playgrounds, really, really, really good. Now they do multiple, so they do one in Berlin and Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And Playgrounds seems to have some of the best speakers. Really friendly event. You get to meet loads of new people. They've got like Wacom doing stuff there. Really cool. I went and met up with Arne Billen and a load of other Belgians and people like that. Yeah, really fun. They even did it was like a separate evening event called Anything But Work, where you just get to listen to these amazing artists talk about their passion and their hobbies and things. I loved it. Concept 101, I think, is a UK one. It is free, but it's not going to be free. It's free entry, but there aren't that many tickets, and they sell out quite quick. So you basically have to get a ticket for free while they're there, and then they sell. I think they sold out in 20 minutes or something insane. It's also not free because you have to travel there, and especially in the UK, it's usually held in London, and so traveling to London ends up being hundreds of pounds anyway. So the fact, and a hotel. So the fact that it's free is, it's just not of any interest to me at all. They're pretty good. They have lots of different speakers, and they have like a social interaction thing, but they are limited in terms of like the venue size and things. So you've got to get in there quick. But they had Derek Zabrocki, Henry Wong, Sheng Lam. They had quite a few good speakers. I think personally it's just not for me because I don't like London. But I would recommend it to you for sure. I think the other problem that I have with a couple of these events is that they are aimed at beginners, and I think that's fine. I think that's really good. But when you sit there and for the 50th time you hear someone like Jason Hawley from ILM go, you should study John Singer Sargent and you should never shade in black. I think I've heard it enough times that I don't feel like I benefit. Yeah, the main thing I'd go for is the networking and meeting people. I've met a couple of people from this server in at Concept 101, which is really cool. And so just hanging out with fellow artists is the fun of it rather than the event itself. But that makes me kind of, I don't know, that makes me sad. It makes me think, if I wanted to hang out with fellow artists, can I not just go and do that anyway? Do I need an event as an excuse? Maybe we should have a Morokai Discord server hangout at some point in the UK. I don't know. One day,
when quite far.
Where the Mora meetup event, it's when we're famous enough, I think that'd be alright. Yeah, I would 100% recommend checking out art events. The community of artists worldwide is so small compared with any other community that you're guaranteed to meet people who have like-minded hobbies and passions and interests, and you can get on with people and talk to them, and it's a great place to meet up with all of your internet friends as well. So yeah, 100%.
So basically, if I'm a student, which is the case, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's you'd say it's still very much worth it.
I think so. Definitely if you're meeting up with people that you know, that you can, if you can find other people to buddy up with, it makes it a lot more enjoyable. If you went there alone and you just sat in the talks and then went home, you might not enjoy it quite as much. But if you're meeting someone else there and you can enjoy the talks together and then talk about the talks and say, well, how did you find that? And whatever, take a sketchbook, do a load of drawing of people. Yeah, I think they're worth it. But worth it for me when I just have to get a train there is very different to worth it for someone who has to pay for an expensive flight, you know. So that's something you're gonna have to bear in mind, is the cost of it all.
Cool.
There you go.
I'll send you or I'll put it maybe here, the link to Trojan Horse also.
Yes, please. Please do. I hope
Like,
everyone in the server can have a little gander at it.
yeah, I mean, it sounds really cool because it's also like 6 days.
So
It's a
it's a
lot.
lot longer than most events. Yeah, I think Playgrounds was only like 3 days, 2 or 3 days. Concept 101's 1 day or 2 days. I can't
You know,
remember.
the weird thing is that, like, if you go on the event page, which I'm gonna post here, it's like the video, like, oh, check out the event. It's like, it's a rave. Like, literally, that's what one of the first things they show.
It's a rave. Oh. I think that was the one
Really?
thing I didn't like about Concept 101 was
It's like I don't care about going to a rave. It's like, what the hell?
yeah, the
Yeah.
Concept 101 had a meetup bit at the end where you're meant to network with your fellow artist, and they had really loud
Yeah.
music on, and I couldn't actually hear any of my fellow artists, so I left. So I don't quite understand the logic of getting lots of shy, socially awkward artists together and then blasting EDM into their ears while they're trying to do something. But oh well. Right.
So that was what was making me hesitate about Trojan Horse.
Mhm.
That you know, like
That's fine.
Blackbox, or at least the website is more professional, but maybe the event's still really cool in Trojan Horse. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. Right, Nitram is next. Hello, Nitram.
it's a lot, man.
You're welcome.
Hello, hello. That's me.
What do you want critique on with this
Um,
creepy skull? Ugh.
Well, the skull is from a while back now, but I remember at the time when I did it, I was very I didn't like my shape design, basically. I thought it was inefficient, and I couldn't really identify why, because it read as the thing which I meant to paint, except for a few drawing inaccuracies. But you could understand what it is, and yet it didn't look like it was.
Yeah, I
Good,
think
or
you're overstating midtones.
Oh.
So so you're going, here's my this over here. That's my shadow group. And then this over here is my lights. So anything that is hit by light is going to go in your lights, right? But actually, in your light group, you're going, I've got things that are getting pretty dark, like they're getting pretty close to shadow, and also pretty light at the same time. So the range on the light group is too wide. At least that's what it feels like to me. So, for example, this jaw, I would average out this information, you know, and at least initially when you're designing your shapes, I would say, look, this is one shape, right? Same thing here. That's one shape. All of this that's in light, we can describe as one shape. And then we can compare it to the shadow shape that's next to it. And that's how we're going to design a nice shape. And then if we really do feel like we got to go darker, which I think we do, we could just go a little bit darker while staying within that group, right? So, whereas on yours...
Yeah,
like,
I overdid it in many places.
Yeah. These shadows are getting so dark that this feels like you're mixing up these groups together, which I don't think we want to do. Same thing like up here. That should be lighter. That's being hit by the same light that's hitting this, which is being hit by the same light that's hitting that. Right. So flattening out a lot of these things, I feel like would be preferable. The other thing is you're just missing a big area of shadow, like.
Oh, true.
Yeah, but that shadow's important. I think it silhouettes the back of the jaw really nicely, and then up here, you know.
Yeah, it outlines it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty cool and pretty important. Like, can we just lose this information? I think we can. So the way that I would probably approach this, let's. In fact, let me just screenshot this first. is a bit like, it all comes back to DK's feedback. Is a bit like this, where I would probably.
I think I got maybe overwhelmed by all the little shapes that you could see within the major
I think so.
volume. Yeah.
So I would probably do this with some kind of a pattern stamp. This is a pattern stamp of a painting I've already done. It doesn't have to be. You could just use a flat tone. And then I'm probably going to grab that sort of flat, warm orange anyway, cover up the whole thing. Maybe it should be a little bit lighter. Right. And then I think on a separate layer on top of that, with literally one flat color, a brush, I think I'm just going to start breaking it up into what those shapes are. Like, and that shape's coming down there, and then it's joining up with here. Like, that's all in shadow. And so I'm just concentrating on those graphic shapes and what they mean. So this jaw's coming in. That's going up. Something like that. There's like a shape there. There's a shape that's coming up and round and whatever else. But I'd approach it like that first, and then once I've got that on a separate layer, I can again go on the layer underneath.
Yeah,
and
I think I broke the continuity between light of all these things. And
yeah, I think just keep them separate. So I could go on a layer underneath, and I could darken the top, and I could get the change in that jaw. And maybe actually there are some brighter parts, so I could make my brush brighter, and I could say, well, this is getting brighter. So is this here, right? And start building that up. But really, the separation between shadow and light, I think, should stay there for now, at least.
And do you also think that there could be any improvements in terms of not value but shape design? Maybe because I felt like my shapes were kind of lacking as well in the study. And they were kind of confusing, and I mean, it obviously it has to do with value as well. But
yeah,
I realized
they kind of it depends how accurate you want to be as well, because shape design is a very weird thing where you could say that the ultimate shape design is just to copy the shape perfectly, because this shape is saying exactly what the form is. So like that little shape there, like that's a very specific shape that you haven't got here, but I think that shape is fine. It says that something similar is there. So it all depends on how simplified you want to go. Again, I think my biggest issue with your shape design is you're overcomplicating things that don't need overcomplicating. So I think this whole area, like these shapes can just join together and get flattened out. I think a big part of shape design is simplifying information, and so like the more of this information that maybe we lose, the better. But it's very cool. It's very sort of sharp, and that is the particular shape design that it seems like you're going for.
Thanks.
I think that's fine. I like this down here. I like these pointy shapes and then these brushstrokes on top. Yeah, I think they come hand in hand. I think that the more you do that kind of a thing, the more you'll make stronger shape decisions, and you make it in that black and white phase. And then any shape on top, you could be much more abstract and interesting with it. You know?
Oh yeah, like a balance of soft edge and hard edge. Like you can, if you have good hard edge shapes, then you can get away with more texture within those shapes. Maybe.
Yeah. I think that's almost exactly it. Is if you have very simple. They're simple, but simple doesn't mean loose. They're simple and they're very precise shapes. then you can play around as much as you want inside of them, and you're absolutely fine because the shape is almost containing that chaos, right? Whereas if the silhouette of that shape is also chaotic, then everything just falls apart. Everything's chaotic. You can't tell what's happening. So, yeah, I think that's what I would focus on. You got a tree as well.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be an interesting follow-up to this one because it's kind of, I think, the same kind of problems with regarding, because I was really trying to paint foliage and understand it, because obviously it's very different from painting foam because of the abstraction. That's I think on a very different kind of thought process.
It is very, very
you're
different.
not literally painting the volume, so.
So how do you paint it here?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no answer to how you. I think different landscape painters have painted it in different ways. I'd look at plein air artists like Isaac Levitan, people who, a lot of Sargent watercolors and things, people who have to simplify this stuff on the fly. I did a plein air painting the other day in my local park. So
I don't think I saw it.
Come and visit Crew Park. This here.
Oh.
I can't remember if I posted it. I probably did. But like these things back here, these are full bushes. And all I'm doing is I'm saying, well, I have a shadow shape that is kind of what I want, and then I have a light shape on top of that. But I'm at no point attempting to draw every individual. Like you're doing quite a nice job here of simplifying these shapes and implying that there's like leaves and things. I didn't really go that far because it's quite a small oil painting. It's on a panel that's about the size of my hand. So it's pretty small, but maybe I could do what you've done, and I could make some shapes that are a bit more specific. So
I do think I have a theory that has seemed recently to start working for me on how to paint foliage. Can I maybe expose it to you, and you can tell me if I'm like misguided or something?
Yeah, you can if you like.
So my theory on how I see a lot of artists do it is that maybe what they do is they do the foliage as like kind of a form, general form. Like for instance, you can take like a branch and round it up as like a sphere or something. And then you can separate that sphere into different outlines. So kind of if you're doing sections of a sphere, like if you were painting a sphere graphically, doing like a light section, and mid-tone section, and a dark section, and you can use the outlines on each of these shapes that you're defining to indicate that within these shapes there are leaves and everything, but you're not actually drawing the leaves.
Yeah.
Because then that would be a huge mess.
Yeah, I think what you've figured out is something that I remember demonstrating to my students a long time ago. So if I have a sphere and I separate my sphere into light and shadow, right? And then I want there to be texture on my sphere, my texture is going to appear in two places and two places only. Not only, but two places mainly. And the first place is going to be the silhouette. So I could take my simple sphere and I can start going, well, actually the silhouette is a bit spiky, right? Well, that's helping, right? And the second place that texture appears, is like on the border between shadow and light. So here, which is exactly what you've done, right? Yeah, I think this is what you were explaining, right? Is that the boundary between those two things is where that stuff's going to appear, and that's completely true. Like that is so simple. It's a light shape and a dark shape, and it feels spherical, but the texture is appearing only there. So you've done a good job here in not doing what some people do, which is going, well, actually, I'm gonna have texture everywhere, right? So I'm gonna put more texture there, and then in my shadow, I'm gonna have a load of texture, and it just becomes too much. Whereas this is quite nice and simple.
Yeah, I felt recently. I was starting to feel this with regards to foliage, like that if you put too many separation of values, then you end up with so many silhouettes that each silhouette doesn't have enough space to breathe visually and exist, and they kind of all compete for attention.
Yeah. So
I
so
guess.
when I'm painting here, I'm doing this, but with just less of the textury stuff. I'm basically reducing something like a bush. So let's take this bush here. I'm going, well, here's my bush, and then, well, it has a shadow, and you know, maybe my shadow is actually too light, right? And then in that shadow, it might even have like an occlusion shadow where it meets the floor or something. So I'm almost describing it as a cube or a cylinder or something else. And if we really get into this silhouette could be nice and crisp, right? But yeah, it's just simple forms. I think that's fine. I think where you're placing those forms, to me, this doesn't look like this, and it's not because you're doing a good job of describing individual bushes. I don't think the drawing matches. So I'm not seeing this shadow that you're seeing unless it's here, in which case
because there was a lot of confusion doing this.
Yeah, smaller enough to the side. So it's more of a sort of how are you placing those things. You know, is the shadow of this tree getting as dark as this thing right at its base? I don't know if that's true. I think the shadow of the tree we could leave as like one of the lightest things. I did it on stream yesterday. Was it the day before? I did a Levitan study, which is this. And the first thing I did was just simplify it into like the black and white that you're doing, and I went kind of wacky with the foliage. I just put a load of brushstrokes down, but I've really got those clear separation between what's this color, what's the darker value, and then where am I putting those dark values inside of that. So maybe that's what you could think about, is actually, let's just wipe out a lot of this information and unify it. And then let's go back in and say, where do we want those dark values? Well, I think here on the side of the hedge it gets dark. It goes pretty quick. Maybe here you want some kind of information. You know, maybe actually we want more of this information with the branches, right? Because the other thing with leaves and foliage is they allow so much light to filter through that the shadow side of these leaves like is still fairly light. It's not that dark. They've got so much subsurface and stuff. You know, even that might be a bit too dark. The tree itself might be a bit too dark. So I like to think of this as like compacting soil or something, and it's something that I do quite a lot. Is let's see if we can find an example. Let's open up these two. So here's a skull, and I'll do this thing as I'm painting, which is kind of what you're doing, and this will apply to the skull that you painted as well, where I'll go, okay, actually here on the skull I want there to be a highlight, and so I'll paint a highlight, and I'll paint it quite strong and quite bright, and then once I've painted it in, I'll grab the other color and I'll paint over it again, right? And so I'm kind of like compacting it back down. So in the context of this, there are your values.
Merging the shapes back together.
Yeah. I'm just reducing that contrast by glazing back over it to unify information. So there's your information, and now I'm just going to unify it. This is a whole bunch of exactly that, as I'm putting down brush marks, and then I'm like, especially let's take something wacky. Let's say that I've got green on my head. So what if I want to put on some green here? Well, I can, but then I'm gonna paint immediately back over it with something
So that
that's gonna neutralize
so
it to sort of hide it, right? So it's not
as to
quite.
prevent like a hard edge from forming on
It's not so much
where
about
you don't want it.
the edge. It's more about just keeping it subtle, and so it's not overpowering everything around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can decide how far I want to go. I've just almost completely covered it, but maybe I just want to grab a soft brush and I just want to, I want to knock it back just slightly so it's still pretty strong. And maybe I want to knock it back more down here and less up here. So it's like, I think when most people are thinking about painting, even just putting down brush strokes, they break into two things. So you have the brush stroke itself, and then on top of that, the next step is to cut in, right? So you'll see this a lot. People put down a brush stroke, and then they cut back into it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think add in step 3, which is glaze. So you put down a brush stroke, you cut back into it to make it the appropriate shape, and then you can select that shape, and on top of it you can put texture and whatever else to cut it to push it back, and you can, it doesn't have to be that you push it back, maybe you push it even further away or something, but you can alter your brushstrokes like that to help them fit in with the rest of the image so that they're actually harmonizing with everything and not sort of being a bit too noisy, right?
Mm.
But there you go.
Okay.
Let's have a look at this last one. We've got two
Bye everyone.
2 or 3 bits of fairy art today. All the fairies are enjoying the critique sessions, which is good. Do you count a cow as a fairy? I have no idea.
Ahoy.
Ahoy there.
Ironically enough, I'm not a furry, but I know how to draw them.
It's very profitable. I can't blame you.
It was a friend of mine who told me to draw. Well, I technically draw a lot because it's animal anatomy with human anatomy. That's how I personally.
What exactly would you like critique on with this?
Pretty much this was part of a challenge that I did on June where I had to draw for 30 days. And this one I wanted to capture more of a woodcutter type of vibe. So I tried also applying knowledge about the use of grays, because this painting has a lot of grays. Not necessarily on the ground that it's standing, but also on the background. Those are grays. They're pretty much the same value, just different hues of color.
I think you're doing a really nice job.
I discovered during the month of June that grays are really fascinating when you mix them together. You can sneak in so many colors with grays, as long as they're from the same value as the overall value that you have in any particular area. You say you want to add more color. Obviously, it has to look cohesive as well.
Yeah.
So I applying that.
I think traditionally people would refer to what you're doing as going through neutrals, and it's one of the best things that you can do, right? So you have your most saturated colors plotted along the outside of your palette, and you even get this with oil painters and people. You work inwards, and as you work inwards, these colors are mixing together and they're becoming those neutral grays. And the majority of a painting takes place in that middle where you're just playing around with subtle temperature and things.
For my rendering, I usually tend to use the eyedropper tool. In some cases, I try to step away from it and try to choose the color myself if I'm not really satisfied with what I color picked. That's how I usually go about my rendering. The other thing is I work on Procreate.
Okay.
And I don't really have an Apple Pencil. I work with my finger.
That's fair. I think there are three main things that I probably want to talk about. So you're really successfully pushing all of these different greys together, but in some places you're just pushing it a bit too far. Where I'm going, why are his legs blue? Where's that coming from? It doesn't seem to be anywhere else in the image. You know, there's no blue up here to speak of, and it's
The
getting.
blue is usually very down. If you trace the light source, you're gonna see in the stomach area on the low bottom, there's a bit of gray, but there's also blue mixed in.
Is it meant to be bounce light from the ground?
Yeah. I try to use it as like ambient light
I
because
think
it's
the
orange.
thing with ambient light is that it's gonna be everywhere. So if your ambient light in your scene is bluish, then the shadows in your red thing are gonna be more blue or cooler. The shadows up here are gonna be more blue and cooler. But it seems very, very localized. Now, if it's meant to be bouncing from the ground or something, then I would expect to see it down here in these shadows as well. I would expect to see it go up into the knees. I think it's just getting a little bit too saturated. It's standing out a little bit too much compared with everything else in a distracting way. So either you put more of that blue everywhere else, or you just tone it down. Like we could just grab that blue and there you go. It's still blue, but like you said, we're taking it back to something a bit more grey, and therefore it's not standing out quite as much. I think that's absolutely fine. So that's number one thing. Number two thing is just thinking about the posing. So he's a wood cutting ox, cow, minotaur, whatever it might be. That is a very peculiar way to hold an axe. I want you to imagine whenever you're drawing a character that you are the character and you're doing the pose. If you had a big axe in your hand, would you A, hold it up like that? And if you did, would the head of the axe be facing away from you rather than towards you? It's quite a scary thing to hold up an axe facing your own head. So it might be that actually the head of the axe faces out towards us as a viewer, which is tricky to get right. You'd want to really play around with the specular highlight that's going to happen at the edge of the axe, but there's a lot of foreshortening going on there. It could be that this arm just comes further down and the axe is like down here or something instead. Because that way you have quite a nice dynamic where this scapula on this back is coming up, and so this shoulder's coming up, and this is quite nice. But then in comparison, maybe we drop this shoulder down. And so have you heard the term contrapposta?
One side is different than the other.
Yeah, more or less. It's this idea that if we have a person, so let's describe a person using boxes. So box for the rib cage. There are legs. If we have all of those things in line with each other, it's kind of boring. But if we begin to sort of stack them like they're leaning, right, then something a bit more dynamic and gestural might happen. So the same thing's happening with the, do you see how even in this the line of the shoulders is, one arm might be up, the other arm might be down. It's just, I think, a little bit more interesting. And then you're getting that axe facing outwards down here in a way that I think is quite nice for the overall silhouette as well.
Oh, okay. I usually went with the arm going up because of directional, and that's why I made the axe big. I think that was probably a big mistake that I did, was that I used the axe as directional, because you can trace it into like the direction.
Like back towards the head or something.
Like you.
Oh, right. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily connect. The lines do not connect, but I tried going like directional based on how it was going.
I think the thing that I think there's a lot of really interesting visual stuff you can play around with in terms of leading lines and shapes and shape design, but I think an audience is always going to view the character and they're just going to see the pose, what the character's doing, the character's expression, before they're ever going to worry about a lot of that artsy stuff, if that makes sense. A lot of that
Yes.
is kind of subconscious and sneaky, and you can use it to great effect. But the first thing you should be concerned about is, why is my character holding this thing in this way? What does that say about the character? To me, this almost feels like he's lifting up the axe as if he's trying to like pump it like a weight, you know, like he's doing a bicep curl. Which that might be what you want. Other thing is the most recognizable part about a strong fairy cow is the horns, right? You'd imagine. But they get lost in the silhouette of the big log, especially with these branches and things. Could it be that the log is just a little bit smaller and the branches are, you know, off to one side or something, and that way we get those horns again? Because I feel like they're pretty strong in terms of that silhouette. Maybe if you do want the log to be bigger, this shoulder just comes down slightly, something like that. I don't even, I'm not going to comment. I don't know anything about fairies, but the fact that a cow has weird, sharp human hand claw things feels a little bit weird to me. But then it would also be weird if he had hoof hands, wouldn't it? So that's a problem that the fairy community can solve, as opposed to me.
Ironically enough, I went with the sharp hands because I wanted to give it like a monstrous feel, sort of a creature design-esque.
That makes sense. Maybe
Because I personally, I don't understand much of the furry community either, so I just resort to studying human anatomy in most of my art pieces.
maybe if you wanted it to be more monstrous, you could really play with how chunky those forearms are, and like the claws itself, right? If they're even bigger, then it feels more like a monstrous-y sort of thing. But
The reason why I kind of went off like the hand fading a little, because I wanted to make it seem like it's like going on the back a little bit, the hand, not excessively, but like the arm overall.
yeah, I get that. It's kind of like a little bit of atmospheric perspective, but that's gonna be my feedback. I think it's a very nice painting.
Thank you. I would like to show more of other things that I have, but I don't think I can.
That's very fair. Right, I think that's it. I don't think anyone else has anything they want feedback on. If anyone does, I probably have 10 minutes, but I also have a sandwich to eat, so up to you. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Moro, I posted the Trojan horse thing on the chat, on the one of the like the feedback channel and the general.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Portugal, September to October. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. I think that's just when term starts for me and my students at the university. Unfortunately. Does it say who the guests are? The Knights.
Yes.
Oh, Sergei's
Yeah.
there. Okay. Oh my god, they've got loads. Ian McCaig. Miss Jizu. Yeah, that looks like it's going to be very good. Dongo Kim.
I think it's going to be better than Lightbox.
I've never been to Lightbox, so I couldn't tell you.
Right.
But it looks like the list of artists is pretty cool. so far, and there are more that are being announced. They've got so many Super Annie artists. That's very cool. Carla
Those are the
Ortiz
Korean
is
guys,
there.
right?
Yeah, they're the Korean people. Carla Ortiz is there, and she's always really, really good to listen to. Every time I've heard Carla Ortiz do a talk, it's been amazing. So, Simon Lee's there as well. Jesus, yeah, I'd definitely go. I think that's epic. Okay, gamers. It's sandwich eating time. I won't see you next week. There isn't one next week. I have my sister visiting me, so I won't be able to do one. But the week after, I sure will. So there you go. Enjoy.
Thanks, man. Good episode.